How do we observe the chitta in our meditation? I think, strictly speaking, the way the Thai Kuba Ajahns often teach, to really observe the chitta, you basically need samadhi. Only once a person experiences full samadhi, then you have got a better idea about chitta. Before that, you usually notice more the activities of the chitta. It's a bit maybe not an ideal simile, but if you have a lake and there's lots of activity, and you notice all the ripples on the surface, or maybe if it's colored, you notice that. So normally you tend to think more the superficial functions of the chitta. I find it interesting that if you look in the 19th century, when they made the first translations of the Pali Canon into Western languages, some of the scholars would translate chitta as thought, which makes sense, because if you're a scholar and you kind of focus on your mind, what you notice will be a lot of thinking. But even if you're not a scholar, that is usually one of the superficial functions of the mind which we can quickly notice. You can see if you look at the third Satipatthana, Cittanupassana, the way the Buddha describes it, Saragang Cittang, Saragang Cittanti Pajanati, Vitaragang Cittang, Vitaragang Cittanti Pajanati, and so on. So one knows the mind affected by desire, sensual desire as affected by sensual desire, and knows the mind free from sensual desire as not affected by sensual desire, and then for other functions. Whereas once the mind is in deep samadhi, you have got a much more comprehensive idea. Another problem is that the mind is usually taking up the objects of the other five senses. So if you have the eye and you have forms, then maybe the candle there, and my eye is functioning, and I pay some attention, and then eye consciousness arises. And the same with ear and sound and so on. But the mind door will pertain of all the five. So usually when I see the candle, it would be quite typical that then the mind is also taking this particular consciousness as an object, so to speak, and is then further proliferating. So usually you have gotten the mental door constantly influenced or kind of disturbed by the five senses. And that's why it becomes quite difficult to understand what is actually mind consciousness, so to speak, what is a mind, without constantly being influenced by the external five senses. And even if it's not full samadhi, in general the practice of samatha is very beneficial for deepening your understanding of what the mind is. Because the calming down, the samatha, which means the calmness, is a gradual process. And usually when we sit down, we stop moving. Again, if you're moving around, you're very busy. You're shopping in a shopping center, or you're at work in a meeting, or opening your emails. It will be very difficult to get a good idea what is your mind. Because there's so much going on, so many distractions, five senses externally and so on. Whereas in meditation, either you're doing walking, and it's just back and forth, and a very, very simple form of walking, or you have no movement because you're just sitting down quietly. And then you start calming down the various mental activities. as we also have it in the instructions for Anapana, breath meditation. Sapakaya Patisangvedi, the one experiencing the feeling the whole body, one breathes in and out. Pasambayang Kaya Sankarang, Asasisamiti, and so on. Like calming the bodily formation, the bodily sankharas. And then we also have it about the mind, calming the chitta sankhara. So the more you're calming down these things, the more you will discover the more refined and deeper aspects of the mind. In particular, usually the mind gets constantly pulled out from the external senses. As in meditation, you do the opposite, and you're focusing more inside. And the more you succeed in focusing inside, the better understanding you get of the mind. Usually you just get, so to speak, your mind going out to these external impressions all the time, which makes it very difficult to understand it. The more you can practice sense restraint in general, and then in particular in meditation, the more you can bring the mind inside, the better will be the understanding. And then the calming down of thinking. So from the third Satipatthana, the important is an understanding by what the mind is affected. When we want to understand the mind, the other thing that the Buddha always teaches, conditions and results. Now that is, to me, or I think widely acknowledged, hallmark of the teaching of the Buddha, paticca samuppada, idappaccayata, dependent origination, this, that, conditionality. Now in both directions, if any phenomenon occurs and you want to investigate what is the cause. Now if we have dukkha, and we're looking what is the cause, in particular internal causes. But also in the other direction, any phenomenon, any sankhara, is also a condition again for something else, for a result. So that is an important thing if you want to understand your mind, not just as a static thing. If you say in English, I want to understand my mind, this is like some static thing, like this metal gong. You don't see much change. But what you usually encounter is processes. So you may want to understand, for example, if the mind is affected by sensual desire, where does it come from? What are the causes and conditions? And you can also look at what is the result. The mind affected by sensual desire or the mind affected by aversion. What is the result of that? And usually grasping and pushing away. If you look for the causes, where does it come from? A typical one is some external sense impression that is likely to trigger either desire or aversion. But it also has to do with things like unwise attention. So for understanding the mind is also very crucial to understand the operating of the mind, the causes and conditions. Oh yeah, so you're quoting the famous house builder Gata, the first words of the Buddha, although traditionally they say he was actually not even saying them aloud, but just thinking them. Visankharagatang chitang, the mind has gone to the unconditioned, or the mind has gone beyond conditions. Now, this is obviously the highest function, that is vimutti citta. This is obviously the deepest understanding one can have of the mind, so to speak, the mind liberated from defilements, and the mind who has realized the unconditioned. And that sense is basically the same, the unconditioned and the mind which is free. Yeah, no, that is would be the deepest aspect of understanding the mind. But before that, you investigate the opposite, how the mind is constantly being tied down in samsara. Sankhara tang chitang, how the mind is conditioned by other sankharas, and how we then use that conditioning process to turn it in the other direction, to gradually free the mind. Unfortunately, if one doesn't practice methodically and by the instructions of the Buddha, we tend to operate our mind in such a way that it gets further entangled, like an insect which is already in the net of the spider and the cobweb, and all the efforts is entangling it further. So it's really important to follow the instructions of the Buddha, that you can actually go in this other direction towards visankhara, towards freeing the mind from all conditions. But your question is excellent and very important, because this is the main thing we have to understand. The first verse is in Dhammapada, you already quoted Dhammapada. Manopurangama Dhamma Manoseta. All Dhammas are preceded by mind, are mind-made. The mind is supreme. So if you can understand the mind, the Buddha said, that is more beneficial than anything else. Now, understanding usually means that you can also train it. Now, that is the main thing we are doing, trying to train our mind. And if we don't understand it, we can't train it. Another factor, as we just in the Vasa, to understand your mind, the solitude is obviously very helpful. Solitude includes not using any gadgets or any screens. The people only understand the screen and what is going on there, on their mobile phone, on their computer. So if we take that all away, you will notice now that you will have to start working with your mind. Extremely helpful.